friends, I'm back again for another episode. For this video, I would like to talk about some of the snare drum books that I use to practice. So I guess I'll start off with the first book that I ever really played out of. It is Intermediate Snare Drum Studies by Mitchell Peters, and this was what I pretty much exclusively practiced out of when I first started. It has a total of 32 etudes. You can see it's the last etude here, and it has a couple of exercises in the beginning, a couple of roll exercises, 6/8, 12/8, accent studies, things like that. This is the second book in his series. There is an advanced book and an elementary book. I would not recommend getting the elementary snare drum studies book. I personally think it's not really super applicable to real playing. I think the exercises in the intermediate book are more than enough for practice. And there are also other books that I think do what the elementary studies book does, but better. So I'm not really a fan of Mitchell Peters' elementary snare drum studies, but his intermediate one is great. So if you want to further your studies and you want to grab some books to practice out of, if you're really into progressing your level of play, then I'd recommend definitely getting intermediate snare drum studies. Now we have Mitchell Peters' advanced snare drum studies, and it has a total of 25 etudes. This is the last one, and unlike the intermediate one, it does not have any exercises at the beginning. It's purely all etudes in this book, all etudes, and it's much harder than the intermediate one. The intermediate one starts off quite easy, and then it ramps up quite a bit by the end, but overall the book is not too hard, and it could be used by even beginner students with the exercises in the beginning. It's pretty helpful, even outside of its etudes, but this is purely for advanced players. Has only etudes. It gets straight into all the more difficult stuff, and it is a direct advancement from the intermediate book. So I'd recommend definitely try looking at the intermediate book before you touch this. And if you want to play this book, I recommend finishing the intermediate book first, because that's what I did. I finished the entire intermediate book. I looked at pretty much all the etudes and exercises in this book. For this book, I've only played up to the 6th etude so far. This one. So I'm only like 25% of the way through this book. I haven't been looking at this super frequently as of late. I should look at this a lot more. But this is a great book if you're looking to refine your playing after you've got all the basics down from the intermediate book. Now, Mitchell Peters has another book that I use called Developing Dexterity. Here. Now, unlike the etude books, which are more musical in nature, this book is about developing dexterity, or refining your technique. And so within this book, you have a bunch of like simple exercises like this. As you get further, as you get further into the book, the exercises become a little more complex. It has flam stuff, has different paradiddle stickings, has different roll exercises. Yeah. It pretty much has the full gamut of things. It's one of the more famous technique books out there, written in which is I think is pretty standard notation. It's a more modern book, so it's a lot easier to read than some of the other older technique books out there. I definitely work out of this quite a bit, especially when I'm preparing to play an etude from one of these books. I need to work on something, so I definitely often look at this book for reference. Now that was pretty much the concert orchestral stuff that I have. These three books, what I usually use, but for rudimental drumming, I usually look out of two books. I look at Wilcoxon's 150 solos, and I look at John Pratt's 14 modern contest drum solos. I initially started off with the Wilcoxon. The Wilcoxon is a much older book than the Pratt book, and his etudes are generally quite a bit shorter. They're very pretty small and concise. Wilcoxon, he likes to condense a lot of notes and rhythms into smaller style solos. So at the beginning you'll see some small solos, relatively easy, and then when you get towards the end they start getting larger and longer with more ink on them, and then you get to a point where the entire page becomes solo. And yeah, these I would say Wilcoxon is he focuses a lot more technically in his solos. They're very dense in terms of the amount of notes and different patterns and technical stuff in it. So it's really good if you want to practice your rudimental technique, or if you want to warm up a bit. Since these things are so short but like highly dense, they're pretty good for warming up your hands. They don't take a lot of time. You can spend 5-10 minutes on these, and yeah, they help out a lot with your rudimental drumming. Now, John Pratt's book, it's also rudimental. As you can see, the solos are a lot longer. This is one solo. It's 2 pages long, so a lot longer than Wilcoxon stuff. And I would say this book is not necessarily as technically dense as the Wilcoxon one, but musically it's a lot more advanced. The rhythms go through bars. They're not like super condensed like this Wilcoxon book. Wilcoxon likes to shove most of his things within the bar, whereas Pratt, he doesn't necessarily care. He'll move rhythms over bars and phrase things throughout couple measures. So I would say, since this is less technically dense but more musically complicated, I'd say they're roughly even in difficulty. They're both hard in their own ways, but I would say for a beginner, Wilcoxon is more of the way to go. You don't have to think too much when playing Wilcoxon. It's more on the technical side, whereas this book has dynamic markings, and it has like specific phrasing, and I would recommend playing from this book after you've looked at the Wilcoxon and developed some idea of rudimental playing. Now, the last book that I have, and I don't look at this too often, but it's Stick Control, which is essentially the godfather of all percussion technique books. It's what every drummer, percussionist has worked out of, pretty much anyone who wants to learn anything anyway. So if you don't have this book, then you should get it if you wanna work on training your technique and your stick control. Pretty much any drummer who's somebody has worked out of this book. It's very similar in style to Dexterity by Mitchell Peters. Um, this is probably the oldest book that I have. Uh, maybe the Wilcoxon might be similar in age, but I think this is the oldest book. But it's very similar in style to Mitchell Peters' Developing Dexterity. But some of the, since this is an older book, some of the notation is a little different. Like the way he writes the stickings with like the flams, with the circles. It's a more it's a different sticking than what is usually used in modern stuff now. John Pratt's solos also use the same notation as stick control. So if you work out of both of these, it will be a lot easier for you to read if you work out of at least one of these. So in the future, when you see this notation with like the flams, right-handed flams and left-handed flams and things like that, it's a lot easier to read. Wilcoxon's one, his stickings are a little more conventional. They don't have the weird circly thingies or whatever. It's just straight letters, and it's not like super complicated. It's just a different style of notation. It's good to work out of both because you'll see both pretty often. And obviously, contraband orchestral stuff, there's no stickings there. They're not rudimental. Generally, you can phrase things the way you want them to. So that's also part of learning to play these things, is learning the stickings and the rhythms and whatnot. But those are pretty much the books that I use to practice. I use some more than others, but generally they're all pretty useful, and I look out at them for certain things. But you don't have to get all of these if you want to practice. You only have to get some, and you can target whatever ones you want depending on what you want to practice. But I definitely recommend using all of these books if you want to get a very holistic approach to practicing things, because everything in I don't know, these 6 books can cover a lot of drumming. So anyway, that's all. Thanks for watching.